The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Proclamation of the Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear even more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. And just as a branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If, however, you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Easter time is a marvelous time. And I was looking forward to being with you on Easter morning, because if you recall, on that particular day, it was April Fool's Day. So I was going to come down here and say to the individuals, there will not be any homily today. And everybody probably would have cheered. And then I would have started walking back, and I would have said, April Fool's Day. But it's no fool, no individual can be a fool unless you are for Christ, as St. Paul says. As we go through life, there are many struggles, many joys, many hardships, many sorrows, and much suffering. And sometimes the sufferings and the hardships outnumber the joys. So what do we have to do then at that particular time? And that's why I think this is such a powerful season. We look to the risen Jesus. We look to Jesus. We look to God as the individual that's going to help us. Paul faced that during his lifetime, especially after he converted. As you know, it was a traumatic experience for him when he was on his way to Damascus, and suddenly he hears his voice, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He didn't know who it was. But it changed his whole life. It inverted his whole life. It became like a U-turn in his life. And so here he is now, this great persecutor of the church, out there proclaiming who Jesus is, that Jesus suffered, that he died, that he rose, that he sent the Spirit to us. And people are saying, what? Who is this guy? The great persecutor. Now all of a sudden becomes the greatest convert worker the church has ever known. They couldn't figure that out. So what happens? Barnabas comes to his aid. Barnabas was the one that was very instrumental in helping Paul at that time. They listened to Barnabas, and they agreed, yes, okay, if this is what happened, then we agree with that. But it's so powerful to remember that Paul had to rely on Barnabas. And that just like we have to rely on God. Because as St. John tells us, that is where we will somehow be immersed then deeply into that love of God. And we prove it then, not in words, because so often that's what happens. We can say often over and over again to individuals, I love you, I love you, I love you, but it has to be shown in action, as St. John says. In action. Love in action. Shakespeare put it very well when he said, they do not love who do not show their love. And that's what Jesus did throughout his life. He showed that love for us and then asks us to be somehow united more and more with him. And that's why I think this is such a beautiful gospel where Jesus says, I am the vine. You are the branches. We have to be connected with Jesus in our lives. And isn't it so true? We're often so connected with our iPhones, our cell phones, our laptops, and maybe even Twitter. One day this lady was asked, what do you want our president to do? And she immediately said, stop Twittering. Here we have Jesus inviting us to that deeper union with him, as there is this union between the branches and the vine. That's the union. And it somehow has to penetrate us to understand that, to be able to believe that, because that's the way we're going to produce the fruit that's so necessary. But in the process, see, this is the part that's often more challenging. In the process, what happens is, then if you go through struggles and hardships and difficulties, that's the pruning process. And the pruning is so necessary, isn't it? Ask any individual who does any kind of pruning. I remember as a novice, that was many moons ago, that we had an orchard there in our novitiate. Beautiful orchard. But they also had some grape vines there. So this old brother, Brother Conrad, I can still remember him, said, okay, you go out there and you trim these branches, these grapevines. So we went out and we trimmed. We said, okay, we came back in. No, he said, go out and trim some more. So we went out and trimmed some more. Came back thinking that we were finished. He said, no, go out and trim some more. He said to us, oh, what? There's hardly anything left. But next spring, wow, what they produced. That's the image, I think, that Jesus is trying to get across to us. The fact that sometimes the pruning has to take place in our lives in that way. And sometimes Jesus says to you, as he says to me, okay, Richard, no, more pruning needed. More pruning. I came in contact with a lady just recently, and she said to me, you know, I had sinus infection, an ear infection, and now I have to go to the dentist to have a molar removed. And I said, when it rains, it pours, doesn't it? Yeah. Sometimes that's what happens in our lives, where we have to be able to say, how is God working in my life this way? How is Jesus inviting me to a deeper union in that way? I just finished reading the book by James Comey, and he tells a story in there about his wife who gave birth to a child. This child, I think it was the third child. But in the process, what happened was that this child got an infection in the brain. The doctor was supposed to check that ahead of time, but at that particular time, they didn't have to do it. So as a result of that, of course, the baby died. But this woman said, I'm going to use this opportunity now to have laws passed where the doctor has to do this. And immediately in that particular area there where they were, the law was passed. Then she went around and proclaimed that to other states as well. It's a marvelous example, I think, of how God can bring good out of evil. And sometimes I think when you reflect on our lives and all the sorrows and difficulties and trials or whatever we've gone through, we often at the time we say, oh, they're so difficult. They're so hard to accept. But in the process, that's the pruning. And that's how we will bear more fruit. Do we believe that?